Well, it's been a short while since I've been able to get onto the Lancia because I had to rebuild my caravan, which had a bit of damp in it. So that was another story anyway. So what I've got to do now is strip everything off the engine so we can get that ready to drop out at the front of the car. That's the intercooler, radiator and turbo all removed. So now we've got a few oil pipes to sort out down here, a couple of senders to disconnect on that. And then basically we're going to work ourselves around this side of the engine, get all the steady bar out of the way. A couple of hoses down here that we're going to need to get to. And then I think it's going to be disconnect the drive shafts. I've got all the ancillaries undone now, so we're just having a quick look underneath at what we've got to get off here. So basically, we've got to get this lower wishbone detached at each end and the track control arm as well, so we can get that all freed off back out of the way. And to do that, we've got to disconnect our good friend, the drive shaft on that side, and then we'll do exactly the same over here. Take that drive shaft off and move all of these suspension components out of the way, pull it all back that way. I think I can leave the anti-roll bar on there, but I do have to undo. In fact, I've already done it, taken off the prop shaft. This mount needs loosening off, obviously, and the mount in this corner, that's all going to have to come out of the way, and we've got to take all that off as well so we can get to our donut mount. And then the only other thing I think will be pulling the prop shaft clear at the back there, supporting that, and getting some slings on it and see if we can't get it down. So we're going to lift the body over the engine basically. So let's have a look now and just see what we've managed to do by undoing those wishbones. So you can see there now that we've got the wishbones out of the way, we've got the the drive shaft out of the way on that side, the same on the other side as well, and that gives us plenty of clearance for the engine now. That should be able to drop clear of those on both sides. I don't want to take any more out because basically we've removed this front mount here, and if I take anything else out it's going to drop on my head. So the next thing to do is probably get the crane in position, get a strap around the engine, take the load off it, and then we can get underneath and take out those last mounts before lowering it down onto the ground. The crane's in position, and I'm using this lifting eye here, and then there's one down there on the side of the gearbox as well, which is quite, let's just get into there, you can see that there now, which is quite handy. However, when you get the strap down here, basically it's putting load on the side of this injector on this side, so I've just freed off the injector rail and taken that injector out, and then the strap will run through between the plenum chamber and the cam carrier, and then it shouldn't foul basically anything horrendous. We don't want to bend something at this stage and put a load of load into the side of an injector. All I've got there is a little D-link. These are really handy. It just, you know, screws up. You haven't got to tighten that up too much. Basically, you could use a hook or something as well, or a bit of rope. But these are endless straps, so they're just like a big circle, basically. They go around on themselves. So a D-link at each end through those lifting eyes, and hopefully we should be able to get a bit of load onto the crane and off those mounts. After a little bit of fiddling around, taking off all of those brackets which are holding the engine on, all the mounts and everything, we're now at this stage. So basically we've removed this corner down here, that's all loose on that point. I've gone down the back and removed the rear gearbox support down there, and now we should be able to just ease the little beast down a bit. So we'll see what she's like on that one. sitting on our trolley. Kaboosh. And there you have it, one engine dropped out. Right, there we are. So just lifted the car up with the crane on the front cross member, just enough that now we can get the engine out from underneath. So I'm just going to block up the sill stands each side, and then that car can stay in that position. Well, that's good. We've got her out. So what we need to do now is have a look and see whether we can split the engine off the gearbox without dropping all the fluid out of it. So what I'm going to try and do is get the starter motor off, we'll take off some of these brackets here off the viscous coupling, and hopefully the diff and the gearbox will just ease away from the bell housing. But if the worst comes to worst, I'm just going to have to take the oil out of the gearbox, aren't I? Simple as that. It's just I'm trying to keep it as mess free as possible. Okay, so about 10 minutes later, and we've now got the starter off, the bolts that hold the diff on, the bracket that holds the viscous coupling on down here, and we've also taken out the main bolts from the bell housing. So these ones here, all the way around and down to that side as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a bit of wood and we're going to give it a little bit of a tickle and see if we can't split it. And then I'll have a look and see just exactly what's going on inside. Of course, there's always one that you forget, and that is this front bracket down here, which basically holds the front end of the viscous coupling. So we need to take this one off, and then that'll mean that everything can go that way, in that direction, away from it. Right, now here's the thing. Just while I was manoeuvring engine away from the gearbox, and you can see there that there's daylight down there between the two, I had a quick look down and I thought I saw a washer in here. However, it's not a washer, it's this little chap here, and I know for a fact that that is the end of this oil gallery here. So you've got an oil gallery that runs all the way down there, that's high pressure, and that's basically distributes oil around the block. And on this end of it you have this like a little core plug, and that has basically jumped out. So it's one bit of information, at least we do know that that is the cause of the issue, and it hasn't blown anything horrendous off the end of the crank, which is good news. However, it does mean that we have got to get it apart. Flywheel's got to come off, obviously, so we can get access to it, and then we're going to have to try and find a way of getting that back in situ. Which is realistically going to mean getting a new one. Okay, so don't make the mistake that I've made. You can't get that off as one unit, basically. You can't get the gearbox and the diff off as one unit. There's just not enough clearance down here, basically, to pull the whole thing away. So in any event, it means splitting this side of it, the diff and the viscous coupling, off the gearbox, which means do not take these bolts out. So leave everything fixed on the engine on this side and just disconnect it around here. You have got to obviously take off the oil pipe down here, and we've done that, and we drained the oil out of the gearbox. So basically, as you can see, that is pretty much ready to come apart. I'm going to do that another night. But in any event, yeah, learn by others' mistakes. You can't get that off all in one go. Leave the diff well alone. Sorry you missed that, guys, but basically I've been able to, with a bit of jiggling around, get that apart. So it's all good news. I don't know what is good news, but in any event, I'm just having a look to see. I don't think there's any contamination on the clutch, actually, which is a good thing. I think the oil has gone into the back of the of the flywheel, or maybe even the back of the plate. Looking at it, let's just have a look around the other side. So where we've got the plate here, it's just basically fired into the back of the plate off the end of this oil galley, and the gallery there. I don't think it actually made it onto the flywheel at all. The flywheel looks completely dry, and certainly the clutch is, which is excellent news. So it's obviously sprayed onto there and then just dropped down in a moment of the hissy fit that it had. But in any event, that's good news. It's apart. So the next job is going to be trying to find out what that oil pressure relief valve was doing. Well, that's the clutch plate off, and you can see it is completely dry and free of contamination, which is excellent. Good. The flywheel itself, the lovely flywheel. I love this flywheel. Also completely free of contamination. So that is excellent news. We'll whip that off and we'll have a look behind. Well, there it is. So we can see that the main crank seal is good, and it is this oil gallery that has let us down. So we're going to tap that out, I think, and we're going to put something decent in there instead of just that little plug, because that is not a good engineering solution. Happy days. So get that fixed, and then I think the next thing to do is get it back up onto the engine stand, and then we can flicker over and have a look at that oil pressure relief valve, which is where I think the problem might be. What I've done here is basically using a tap, and this is a NPT tapered thread one. Dip it in a load of grease, and then when you tap it, you can see that all of the rubbish sticks to it and it brings it back out again, so you're not leaving furrings inside the hole. But basically the other thing that I did as well is I got a bit of cloth and I rammed that all the way down inside, and then you can see as it's been pulled out afterwards, it's kind of collected all the crap as well, and this far end of it is actually very clean. So that should have pulled all the swarf out, etc., with those two methods. And then what we've got now is a little grub screw, and that will basically go in there. So what I need to do now is just clean all the grease off, and we'll get a bit of RTV on it, and then we'll wind that in, and then that is going to do that job. And that's the end result. So got a bit of RTV round it and wound the grub screw into there, nice and flush. That's not going to come out. Regardez, la stella artois est arrivée. And there it is. So that's the sump off. I've just been very careful in separating the gasket away from the sump, just to make sure that I can reuse it basically. However, this is the fella that we're interested in here. This is the oil pressure relief valve spring on that, and I'm just going to give that a little push with a screwdriver and just see whether or not, oh, I can tell you now it's quite firm just by the finger. Just going back to the original pump, which was here, and that's the pressure relief valve there. Now when I press that here, I can feel it. You can see it's kind of springy at that point. So yeah, that does actually feel a bit tough. So I'm just going to give that a little press with a blunt screwdriver, and we'll see whether or not it kind of just frees up a little bit. Right, I've given the spring a bit of compression, and then the little clip just slides out sideways, and then down inside we have ourselves, and if you just bear with me, put a bit of light on it, we've got the little piston in there, you can see that. So basically get a strong magnet, we should be able to pull her out, I'm hoping. There we are, that's that. It should come out like that. Now, I was expecting that to be a little bit stiffer than that, and there's oil around it, and I don't think it's been jammed, which is kind of perplexing. And it is the correct way around because I've had the old one out and the holes are at the top, as you can see there. So that's going back in, basically, and then we can put the spring back in behind it and the clip. So I'm going to have a bit more of a look and a read and just see what else that problem might be. Well, I've had a good look at that pressure relief valve. That all seems to be working fine. There's nothing else in there which can be basically causing an issue. So I am just wondering whether we had a slight jam in it when it first started up and then it freed itself off possibly. But in the meantime, the plug just let go in the end of the block there, and obviously that's what dumped a load of oil everywhere. Anyway, the long and short of it is that we have put the sump back on. The plug was put back in the other end of that, and I'm going to just basically go ahead and get that engine back in the car. Absolute worst comes to worst, I'll be able to get to the sump from underneath without taking the engine out. And of course, the only reason the engine had to come out was because of the plug coming out the end of the oil gallery behind by the bell housing there. So let's stick it back together and let's just see what occurs. That's it off the stand, and we've now got the front diff and the viscous coupling back on. So the next job then is to get the flywheel back on the end there. Flywheel and clutch done. It's like deja vu, isn't it? Well, anyway, we have got the gearbox remounted. So the next thing I'm going to do before it goes on the car is fill it up with some oil, because that was a pain in the arse last time. So we'll get all the gearbox filled with oil, and then we can lift her up into place. Obviously the engine oil, we can't put that in because of the oil lines that aren't attached. But I can certainly get the gearbox filled up. So we'll get that done, and then we can get it lifted back up into place, all being well. Well, it's back in, and again, quite straightforward to do really. Just got to get the sequence right, remember which mounts to go in first, so you can just wiggle them around and get the bolts in the right place. But in any event, I can now free off the crane. She's fully on all of the mounts in there. So we've got that one in the corner here, and that one, and then that big tricky one down the back there by the back of the gearbox. But in any event, they're all done. I've still got to do the steady bar at the front here, but what I'm going to do now is try and get some of these ancillaries all tightened up and fixed, like the water pipes, oil feed for the gauge, stuff like that. And then of course the biggie really is getting the turbo back on, and then the radiators, etc. So I'm not going to waste time doing any of the drive shafts and the suspension under there. We're going to try and get it all ready to run, and then hopefully get it fired up for you. There's the turbo on. So I've just connected up the oil feed into there. Just need to do the drain down here, which is quite an easy one to get on. That's just a flexi pipe, and then pop that over there so that goes back down to the sump, and then that'll have a Jubilee clip on there. I'll just go and tighten that one up, and then I think couple of little air lines on here that we need to connect, and we are ready then for the intercooler. Right, here's a top tip for you. So trying to get these little bolts down here and locking washers into the fuel rail, and if you look at the bolt, it's like kind of really fiddly, and I can't get down there with my fingers, and every time I get near it they just get dropped. So there is a solution, and basically it is, let me put that on there so you can see, one of these. So get yourself a magnetic extension, pop the bolt in the middle of it like that. The washer will stick to it as well, so it ain't going to fall off. And then let me just get this right. You can just basically feed that into the hole, and you should be able to get it started as well in there just using the magnet. And there you go. So it's in without dropping it. So once the first one's aligned, that'll become quite easy to do. That's it, it's done. We've got the radiators on, the intercooler on, got all of the hoses all back where they came from, got all of the loom all connected up now, and the ejectors are all in, and the fuel is all there as well. So the next thing I need to do is get the oil back in, and because the oil that came out of it, I kept that in a clean container. Obviously it hadn't been used at all, so there's no way I'm just chucking it, but we don't know what kind of contamination is in there. So what we're going to do is run it through a paint filter basically. So that's a 400 micron mesh that'll just catch any little bits and bobs that are floating about in there, but it should be all right anyway. So anyway, I'm going to drop the oil back into it, then we need to get some water back into the old radiator system, and then I'm going to set up the tripod, because I do not want you guys to miss me actually starting it up and seeing if it will run properly. I know you missed it last time. So that's the plan. Let's see how we go. Well, it runs, doesn't it? Still getting some very high oil pressure in there, so I need to have a look at that. But it runs, and if you haven't got at least 12 volts in that battery, the ECU just doesn't like it at all. So when we put the booster on it, bang, fired up immediately. That's good news. This is classic. So I've just been trying to clean up some of these granules here. So this is the stuff that we use for drying out the floor when you got oil spills, things like that. Of course, you need the dustpan for that. Can't find it anywhere, so I've had to resort to using a shovel and a brush, which is a right pain in the arse. So anyway, making my way back over here to get my beer. And what do? Walk past the bloody dustpan and brush. I'll tell you what, you couldn't write it, could you? It's just one of those things. I've put it back up on the sill stands for the rear because we need to put in some diff oil, and that's just making it a little bit easier. So basically I've got to get underneath the car now and find out where that filler plug is, get some diff oil in it, and that is the last of the transmission fluids done. So basically what I'm going to use is some of this Miller's stuff. This has been recommended by the guys at Miller's themselves. And on a previous video I've basically gone with Miller's oils throughout the engine and the transmission. So that's the right stuff for the job. What I've got to do though is I've got to loosen off the filler plug, which is on the side. I'll show you that in a minute. But not only that, I've also got a drain plug under the back there, which needs to be taken out, and the thread needs sealing on it because it's got a leak. So that's the drain plug, which has got a slight weep on it here. So I'm going to have to take that out, but it is quite tight against the carrier. So I'm going to have to loosen off some of these suspension bars so that we can get a bit of free play in there, just to loosen that out. So that's a little bit of a design issue there, because that should easily be able to come out straight away. However, going on from there, up the side, up there, you can see underneath, that is the filler plug, that big one up there. When you take that out, you can then just fill up the diff until it overflows and you know you've got the right quantity. I think it's about 1.1 litres of diff oil that's got to go in there. Well, as a right pig, what I've had to do is basically take off all of the support bars all around the diff, and then I was able to just kind of get a metal bar in between the diff and here and just lever it enough just to get that out. So there's a little bit of spring basically in this, but it has meant that I've had to take off all of those control arms and the lower wishbone arms as well. But anyway, that's out at the minute, just the last little remnants there dripping out. I'm going to get the plug, this little fellow, we'll get that cleaned up, and then basically we can get a bit of PTFE into that thread and get it back up in that hole. Let's got that plug back in now with a bit of PTFE in it. That stopped the job there. The side one, dead easy to get at now, obviously with all the bars out of the way. Both of these plugs, both the drain and the filler plug, are 17mm. I've already lent on that one a bit. It was a little bit stiff, but basically we're able to now get that out of there quite easily, because obviously you've got a steel plug going into an alley thread, and they can be a little bit tough, but there she is, happy days. So what I've got to do now is get my oil filler syringe, and then basically I'm just going to fill the diff up until she starts to dribble out, and then the plug can go back in, and I'm going to put a little bit of PTFE around that thread as well. On further inspection, that actually looks like a brass plug. It's kind of like the wrong colour for steel, but in any event there's no corrosion on it, so that's probably what it is. But either way, they are fairly tight, but don't give up, it will come out. This is all I've got for getting the oil in there, because obviously when you've got one of these, trying to tip it sideways into that hole is a bit of a nightmare. This handy parts oil change kit came from Screwfix, and it's like 13 quid, so it's a bit of a no-brainer. You get a bottle in there, you get a little funnel, and you get this doohickey, which is the main bit of kit. It's like a syringe pump. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the little plastic tube on it, and then basically we can suck our oil out of the bottle into there, and then we can fire it up. This takes, I think it's it said half a litre. I'm not sure about that, because that actually says 0.3 on it, but in any event doesn't really matter, because the diff is going to tell us when it is full. Well, that's it, we've got the oil in the diff, and I would say that having that syringe to suck it out of the bottles and squirt it up into there, it was just so much easier than trying to bugger about trying to tip a bottle on its side, and a lot cleaner as well, obviously. So anyway, I've just got to get all the suspension arms back in place now, and then we'll be ready for dropping it back down, I think, onto the wheels. Well, with that diff filled up, that kind of brings us to the end of another episode of Otto's Garage. We got it running. It runs a bit like a bag of shit at the moment, to be fair, but I'm quite sure once the chip has had a bit of a remap on it, it'll be fine. But in any event, the next job on it is going to be getting the brakes bled, getting it back on the ground, and then we're going to try and turn some wheels and take it for a drive. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Otto's Garage. Catch you next time. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.